Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The necropolis had not seen a living thing in centuries. Its towering spires, once majestic and brimming with necromantic energy, now loomed over the crumbling streets like the skeletal remains of forgotten gods. Shadows moved between the broken cobblestones, each one a reflection of the countless undead that called this kingdom home. It had been over 100 years since the presidency had been filled, and the kingdom had fallen into disrepair, as though the very fabric of death magic that held it together had started to fray. But now, the time had come, the election, an event so rare in the annals of the Undead Kingdom's history that some had forgotten what it even meant. 3 candidates, 3 powers, 3 visions for the future of the Undead Kingdom, and each of them, determined to seize the throne. At the heart of the necropolis, in the Grand Hall of Bones, the Council of Elders gathered. These ancient beings had ruled in the absence of a president, their power vast yet static, incapable of the kind of change the kingdom so desperately needed. The elders had seen countless centuries of rule, some since the first necromancers walked the world, and they had grown weary of stagnation. "Morketh will tear this place apart," one of the elders muttered, her voice dry as old parchment, her hollow eyes fixed on the figure standing at the far end of the hall. Morketh the Vengeful. Cloaked in black, his face hidden beneath the deep hood, Morketh radiated an aura of fear. His magic was a dark, twisted thing, a reflection of his desire for vengeance, a thirst for power that had consumed him long ago. His hands, veined and skeletal, clutched a staff topped with a jagged shard of obsidian. As the first of the candidates, he was expected to demonstrate his power, to show the council and the gathered masses what kind of president he would be. With a sweep of his staff, Morketh stepped forward. "Witness," his voice echoed through the chamber, "the future of the Undead Kingdom." He raised his arms, and the ground began to tremble. The cobblestones of the Hall of Bones cracked and split, and from the depths of the earth, an army of skeletons began to emerge. Each one a twisted caricature of the undead, their bones blackened and sharpened like weapons. Wraiths followed, their forms like shadow and smoke, flickering at the edges of perception. The air grew thick with a stench of decay as the undead army took shape before him. "This," Morketh declared, his voice rising, "is how we shall rule." Through fear, through absolute power. The council watched in silence, their expressions unreadable. The crowd of undead that had gathered in the hall remained still, their hollow eyes fixated on the display of raw power. Morketh stepped back, his army of death standing motionless behind him. He bowed slightly, his dark robes sweeping the floor as he turned to face the council. His work was done. He had made his point to rule through terror, and the kingdom would thrive. But the council was not yet convinced. They had seen such power before, and while it was impressive, it was not the only path forward. Allure, the compassionate, stepped forward next. Her presence was a stark contrast to Morketh's. Where he radiated darkness, she exuded calm. Her pale skin glowed softly, her white robes trimmed with silver. Her eyes, a gentle shade of violet, reflected a depth of empathy rarely seen in the undead. "I offer a different vision," she said, her voice soft but clear. "A kingdom not ruled by fear, but by balance. Life and death are but 2 sides of the same coin. We, the undead, are not cursed to eternal suffering. We can find peace, even in this state." With a wave of her hand, the air shimmered around her. Spirits, once lost to the void, began to materialize. They floated gently around her, their forms translucent but peaceful. These were the souls of the forgotten dead, of those who had wandered the afterlife without purpose, until Allure had found them. "I bring peace to the restless," she said softly. "I guide them to their rest. We, too, can rest. We do not have to suffer endlessly." The spirits circled her, their whispers soft and soothing. She extended her hand to a group of undead standing near the back of the hall. Old soldiers, their bodies decayed, their souls trapped in endless servitude. With a flicker of her magic, Allure brought them back to their former selves, if only for a moment. Their eyes cleared, Their bones strengthened, and they stood tall, as they had in life. "This is my promise," Allure said, looking to the council, "a kingdom where the dead may find peace, where we may still exist, but in harmony with the living, with dignity." The council murmured among themselves. Allure's magic was powerful in its own way. It was not the raw, destructive force of Morketh's necromancy, but it was profound. She offered something that had not been seen in the kingdom for centuries: a hope. Finally, Solace the Life-bringer stepped forward. He was an anomaly in the undead kingdom, an outsider in every sense. A life mage, his very existence was an affront to the necromantic energies that ruled this land. But he had come, offering a vision that no one else dared to imagine. Solace was tall and fair, his robes a deep green, embroidered with gold that shimmered like sunlight on water. His hair was the color of wheat, and his eyes glowed with a strange inner light. In his hands, he carried no staff or weapon, only life itself. "I know I am different," Solace began, his voice strong and steady. "I know many of you see my magic as a threat. But life and death are not enemies. They are part of the same cycle." He knelt, placing his hands on the cold stone floor. Slowly, tendrils of green began to spread from his fingers, creeping across the ground. Where they touched, life sprang forth. Vines and flowers bloomed, the air filled with the scent of fresh earth, a smell long forgotten in this land of death. "I offer rebirth," Solace said, "not just for the land, but for us. The undead kingdom has withered for too long. It is time for something new, something that grows, something that changes." He stood, and with a single gesture, summoned a group of figures from the crowd. They were long dead, their bones brittle, their faces drawn and gaunt. Solace extended his hand, and for the briefest of moments, life returned to them. Their skin healed, their eyes brightened, and they breathed once more. "This is the future I see," Solace said, his voice full of conviction. "A future where we are not bound by death, but where life and death coexist." The council sat in stunned silence. Solace had done the unthinkable. He had brought life to the dead. It was a dangerous magic, one that threatened to disrupt the very foundations of their world. But it was also beautiful, and it had a strange appeal. As the three candidates stood before the council, the hall buzzed with energy. The fate of the undead kingdom hung in the balance, and the choice was not an easy one. Morketh stood tall, his eyes blazing with ambition. He knew his methods were harsh, but he believed they were necessary. Fear was the only way to maintain control over the chaos that was the undead. Allure watched the council with calm eyes, her heart steady. She believed in balance, in compassion, and in the power of peace. But she also knew that her gentle ways might not be enough to protect the kingdom from the forces that sought to destroy it. And Solace, standing apart from the other two, held his breath. He knew he was an outsider, that his vision was radical, but he believed in it with every fiber of his being. The kingdom needed change, a real, profound change, or it would wither and die, just like the land around them. The council of elders conferred quietly, their ancient voices barely more than whispers. After what felt like an eternity, they turned back to the candidates. "We have seen your powers," one of the elders said, his voice deep and resonant. "And now, you will face the trial of the undead. Only through this trial will we know who is truly fit to lead." The trial of the undead was an ancient rite, designed to test not just the power but the resolve of those who sought to rule. It was not a trial that one passed with brute strength alone. Only those who could wield both life and death with wisdom could survive it. The three candidates stood at the edge of the dark abyss, a swirling pool of necromantic energy that led to the heart of the undead kingdom's underworld. The council of elders gestured toward it with their bony hands, their voices low and ominous as they spoke in the old tongue. "This is your trial," the eldest of the council rasped. "Each of you will descend into the underworld, where the spirits of those who have come before you dwell. You must prove your worth not by command, but by your ability to endure what lies below. Only one of you will return with the mantle of leadership." Without hesitation, Morketh stepped forward first. His black robes billowed around him as he strode into the abyss, disappearing into the churning mist. The crowd watched in silence as the dark figure vanished, knowing that whatever awaited him below, it would be a reflection of the path he had chosen. Allure followed next, her calm demeanor unshaken. She nodded to the council and stepped into the swirling pool, her form slowly dissolving into the mist as if she were part of the underworld already. Her soft presence, the embodiment of peace, vanished as she descended, leaving behind only the quiet hope that balance might prevail. Finally, Solace stood before the abyss, his bright eyes flickered with determination. As the life mage, he knew his journey into the realm of the dead would be the most difficult. The underworld was a place where life was a distant memory, and its denizens would likely see his power as a threat. But Solace had always believed in the cycle of life and death, and he knew that to lead this kingdom, he would need to face its darkest truths. The crowd remained silent as the last candidate disappeared into the underworld. For the first time in centuries, the fate of the kingdom hung on the actions of these three individuals. The descent was slow and painful. Each step down into the abyss felt like a tug on the soul, as though the weight of centuries of death and despair pulled at their very essence. For Morketh, it was a familiar sensation. He had lived in darkness for so long that the underworld felt like home. His mind was focused on his Goala domination through fear. He would show no weakness. Morketh soon found himself standing before a twisted landscape of jagged rocks and swirling black clouds. In the distance, a vast army of skeletal warriors marched toward him, their bones clattering as they advanced. They were the spirits of those he had once commanded, lost souls who had followed him in life and death. "You seek power," a voice hissed from the shadows. It was the voice of one of the ancient spirits, a being that had ruled long before Morketh had ever set foot in the kingdom. "But power without purpose is a chain that binds. You will be tested, Morketh, not by your strength, but by your willingness to sacrifice." Morketh's eyes narrowed. He had sacrificed plenty in his lifetime, his family, his humanity, even his soul. But he knew that whatever the trial asked of him, he would not falter. Raising his staff, he summoned the army of skeletal warriors to his side, preparing for the test that lay ahead. In another part of the underworld, Allure stood in a place of quiet suffering. The spirits around her were not violent or angry. They were simply lost, wandering in circles, their faces twisted with pain and confusion. These were the souls who had died without peace, and they cried out to her, their voices filled with sorrow. "You are the compassionate," another voice whispered, one that seemed to come from the very air around her. "You offer peace to the dead, but can you bring peace to those who cannot rest?" Allure felt the weight of their suffering on her shoulders. She had always believed in balance, in guiding souls to rest, but these spirits were beyond her reach. She reached out to them, her magic flowing like a gentle stream, trying to soothe their pain. But no matter how much she tried, their anguish only deepened. Her heart ached. The trial was not one of power, but of compassion. Could she bear the weight of all this suffering and still remain true to herself? Allure closed her eyes, focusing on the souls around her, and slowly began to channel her energy into them. She knew she could not save them all, but perhaps, she could offer them a moment of peace. As Allure battled with the suffering of the dead, Solace found himself in a place where life and death clashed in violent conflict. The ground beneath him was cracked and dry, while above, dark clouds swirled in chaotic patterns. He could feel the tension in the air, the very fabric of the underworld resisting his presence. "You do not belong here," a deep voice rumbled, echoing through the sky. "Life has no place in the realm of the dead." Solace stood firm, his bright aura clashing against the oppressive darkness of the underworld. He knew this was his greatest challenge. As a life mage, he represented everything the underworld despised: a rebirth, renewal, growth. And yet, Solace believed that life and death were not enemies, but part of the same cycle. The ground shook, and from the earth, grotesque creatures emerged. These were the twisted spirits of the dead who had resisted death itself, clinging to their decayed forms in defiance. They advanced on Solace, their eyes burning with hatred, their twisted claws reaching for him. Solace raised his hands, summoning the energy of life from deep within him. Green light burst from his fingertips, and where it touched the ground, new life sprang forth of flowers, vines, and trees. But the life magic did not banish the creatures. Instead, it seemed to enrage them further. "You will never bring life here." The voice thundered again, and the creatures charged at him, their forms blurring as they moved. Solace gritted his teeth. He would not give up. This was his trial, and he would face it with everything he had. Time in the underworld passed differently. To those watching from above, it felt like an eternity. But eventually, the swirling pool of necromantic energy began to shift, and the first of the candidates returned. Morketh emerged from the abyss, his eyes glowing with dark triumph. His skeletal army marched behind him, their hollow eyes filled with the same hunger for power that drove him. He had passed the trial, but at what cost? Allure followed soon after, her face pale and drawn. She had faced the suffering of the dead, and though she had not been able to save them all, she had offered them peace, if only for a moment. The weight of their pain still lingered in her heart, but she had not faltered. And then, Solace returned. He was bruised and battered, his green robes torn and stained, but he still radiated the same vitality that had defined him from the beginning. The underworld had tried to break him, but he had endured. The council watched as the three candidates stood before them once more. Each had faced their trial, and each had returned. But now, the final decision had to be made. "You have all proven your strength," the eldest of the council said, his voice a low growl. "But the undead kingdom can only have one ruler." Morketh stepped forward, his dark aura pulsating with power. "I have shown you the path forward," he said, his voice cold and confident. "Through fear, we will rule. Through power, we will survive." Allure shook her head, her voice soft but resolute. "We do not need to rule through fear. We can rule with compassion, with balance. I have shown you that peace is possible, even for the dead." Solace, still breathing heavily from his trial, stepped forward last. "Life and death are not enemies," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We can bring life back to this kingdom. We can restore what has been lost, not just through death, but through renewal." The council conferred in hushed tones, their ancient faces expressionless. Finally, they turned back to the candidates. "The choice is clear," the eldest said, his voice carrying a finality that echoed through the hall. "The future of the undead kingdom lies not in fear, nor in stagnation, but in balance and renewal." He turned to Solace and Allure. "Together, you will lead this kingdom. Through your combined magic, life and death will find harmony. The kingdom will be reborn." Morketh let out a low growl of fury, his hands clenching into fists. But he did not protest. The council's word was law. Solace and Allure exchanged a glance, both understanding the enormity of the task before them. The kingdom would not change overnight, but they had taken the first step toward a new future. As they stood before the crowd of undead, a strange sensation rippled through the air, a sense of hope, of possibility. For the first time in centuries, the undead kingdom felt alive.